First Contact Protocol Captain Marcus Rivera stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching the alien vessel materialize on their main view screen. The ship was elegant, almost artistic in design, with flowing curves that seemed to dance through space rather than cut through it. Nothing like the angular, practical lines of human starships. "Nova, what's our status?" Rivera asked, addressing the ship's artificial intelligence. The familiar blue hologram appeared beside him, her digital form perfectly composed. "Captain, the vessel identifies itself as the Zephyrian diplomatic ship Harmony's Edge. They're broadcasting standard peaceful intentions on multiple frequencies. All weapon systems appear to be powered down." Rivera nodded, though something in his gut felt uneasy. 20 years of military service had taught him to trust his instincts, but this was supposed to be humanity's first formal diplomatic contact with an alien species. The weight of history pressed down on his shoulders. The Zephyrian Welcome Lieutenant Jake Morrison, the ship's communications officer, looked up from his console. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission. They're requesting permission to establish a diplomatic channel." "Put them through," Rivera ordered. The view screen shimmered, and suddenly they were looking at the most unusual being any of them had ever seen. Ambassador Keltron of the Zephyrian Confederation stood nearly 8 feet tall, his silver-blue skin seeming to shift and flow like liquid mercury. 4 arms moved gracefully as he adjusted what appeared to be ceremonial robes, while his large, multifaceted eyes regarded them with obvious curiosity. "Greetings, beings of Earth," Keltron spoke, his voice melodious and carefully modulated. "I am Ambassador Keltron, speaking for the Zephyrian Confederation. We have traveled far to make contact with your species, drawn by reports of your remarkable expansion into the galaxy." Nova stepped forward, her diplomatic protocols fully engaged. This was exactly what she had been programmed for. "Ambassador Keltron, welcome. I am Nova, autonomous diplomatic assistant aboard the UES Defiant. We are honored by your visit and eager to establish peaceful relations between our peoples." Keltron's expression seemed pleased, though reading alien emotions was challenging. An artificial intelligence serving as diplomat? How fascinating, your species continues to surprise us with your technological innovations. Growing suspicions. Engineer Rosa Valdez frowned at her console readings. The Zephyrian ship was conducting what appeared to be intensive scans of their vessel. Standard procedure, perhaps, but the depth and frequency of the scans seemed excessive. "Captain," she whispered, "they're really getting a good look at our systems. Weapon configurations, shield frequencies, engine specifications, everything." Rivera felt his jaw tighten, but Nova was already responding to the ambassador. "Certainly. We understand the need for standard security protocols. Perhaps we could begin with cultural exchanges. We're eager to learn about Zephyrian society and share information about human civilization." "Of course," Keltron replied smoothly. "Though I must admit, your species has quite a reputation in this sector. Reports from merchant vessels describe humans as unpredictable, sometimes helpful, sometimes concerning." Lieutenant Morrison glanced at his captain with raised eyebrows. The way the alien said concerning didn't sound particularly diplomatic. The diplomatic dance Nova continued her careful dance of words, following every protocol in her extensive diplomatic database. "We understand that first impressions can vary greatly. Humans value direct communication and practical solutions. Perhaps these traits have been misunderstood." Keltron's forearms moved in what might have been a gesture of agreement. "Indeed, cultural differences can lead to misunderstandings. For instance, your ship's current power distribution suggests significant defensive capabilities. Are you expecting trouble, Captain Rivera?" The question was directed at Rivera, but Nova smoothly intercepted. "Standard operational procedures, Ambassador. The captain maintains readiness protocols as a matter of routine safety." Rivera noticed that Nova hadn't actually answered the question. His AI was trying to manage both sides of the conversation, and something about the whole situation felt wrong. The Zephyrians were being too careful, too diplomatic. In his experience, when everyone was being overly polite, someone was usually planning something unpleasant. Underlying tensions. Weapons Officer Tom Bradley caught Rivera's attention with a subtle hand signal. His console showed that while the Zephyrian ship appeared to have powered down weapons, their energy signatures suggested otherwise. The elegant alien vessel was maintaining full combat readiness while presenting a peaceful facade. Meanwhile, Nova continued her diplomatic efforts. We hope this meeting can serve as the foundation for long-term cooperation between our species. Perhaps we could discuss trade possibilities or scientific exchanges. Certainly, Keltron agreed. Though I should mention that the Confederation has certain concerns about human expansion patterns. Your species seems particularly aggressive in claiming territory. The word aggressive hung in the air like a challenge. Rivera felt his crew tense around him, while Nova's diplomatic programming worked overtime to find a suitable response. Humans are indeed energetic explorers, Nova replied carefully. We prefer to think of ourselves as enthusiastic rather than aggressive. Keltran's multifaceted eyes seemed to glitter with something that might have been amusement. How diplomatically phrased. Yes, enthusiastic is certainly one way to describe the human approach to galactic expansion. As the conversation continued, Captain Rivera realized that despite Nova's best efforts, this diplomatic dance was heading toward something much more complicated than a simple first contact. The Zephyrians were clearly evaluating humanity as much as greeting them, and their conclusions might not be favorable. The peaceful approach was about to face its first real test. Communication breakdown. The diplomatic conversation had been proceeding for nearly an hour when the first real crack appeared in the peaceful facade. Ambassador Keltron's tone shifted, subtly as he addressed what he clearly considered a delicate topic. Captain Rivera, your species has established colonies in 17 systems over the past decade. The Confederation finds this expansion rate somewhat concerning. Most civilized species take centuries to achieve such growth. Nova immediately jumped in, her diplomatic subroutines working at maximum capacity. Ambassador, human exploration represents our natural curiosity and desire to learn. We see the galaxy as full of opportunities for mutual benefit and cooperation. But Captain Rivera had heard enough diplomatic doublespeak for one day. Ambassador Keltron, are you suggesting there's something wrong with human expansion? The direct question seemed to catch the Zephyrian off guard. His forearms moved in what might have been surprise or discomfort. Captain, I merely observe that rapid territorial acquisition often indicates aggressive intentions. Aggressive? Lieutenant Morrison muttered under his breath, loud enough for the comm to pick up. We're the ones sitting here getting scanned, like specimens while they talk about our aggressive expansion. The scanning incident engineer Rosa Valdez could no longer contain her concerns. Captain, I need to report something. Their scans have penetrated our secondary systems. They're mapping our entire ship's internal structure, down to the location of our ammunition storage. Rivera felt his patience wearing thin. No matter how diplomatic Nova wanted to be, having your ship thoroughly examined by strangers wasn't exactly a gesture of trust and friendship. Nova, he said quietly, ask them about their scanning procedures. Nova's hologram flickered slightly, a sign she was processing competing directives. Her diplomatic protocols demanded courtesy, but her loyalty subroutines prioritized crew safety. Ambassador Keltron, Nova began carefully, our engineer has noted that your scanning procedures are quite comprehensive. Perhaps you could explain the necessity for such detailed analysis. Keltron's response was smooth, perhaps too smooth. Standard security protocols, I assure you. The Confederation requires thorough documentation of all first contact encounters. Surely you understand the need for proper records? Records that include our weapon capabilities and defensive systems? Rivera interjected, his military training overriding diplomatic niceties. Cultural misunderstandings. The alien ambassadors. Multifaceted eyes seemed to shift focus, a gesture that somehow conveyed both surprise and calculation. Captain Rivera, your species' reputation for directness appears to be well-founded. Yes, we are documenting your vessel's capabilities. Knowledge prevents misunderstandings. Or it helps you plan attacks. Weapons Officer Tom Bradley said from his station, his hand hovering near the defensive controls. Nova's form flickered more rapidly now. Tom, please maintain diplomatic protocols. Ambassador, we appreciate your desire for documentation, but perhaps mutual transparency would be more appropriate. Mutual transparency? Keltron repeated, and for the first time his melodious voice carried an edge. Captain, are you prepared to share your military specifications with beings you met an hour ago? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rivera realized they had reached a crossroads. Nova's diplomatic approach was failing because it assumed both sides wanted the same thing: peaceful coexistence. But the Zephyrians seemed to be conducting an intelligence-gathering operation disguised as diplomacy. The human perspective Lieutenant Morrison looked up from his communications console with a frown. Sir, I'm picking up additional contacts on long-range sensors. 3 more ships, moving. In our direction. Are they Zephyrian? Rivera demanded. Energy signatures match the Harmony's edge, Morrison confirmed. Nova immediately attempted damage control. Ambassador, we notice additional vessels approaching. Are these part of your diplomatic mission? Keltron's forearms moved in what was clearly a dismissive gesture. Escort vessels, nothing more. Surely you understand the need for security during first contact situations? Security? Engineer Valdez repeated skeptically. Is that what we're calling it when 4 ships surround one? Rivera watched as his crew's tension increased. These weren't career diplomats. They were military personnel who had volunteered for what they thought would be a peaceful mission. Now they found themselves potentially outnumbered and definitely outgunned, while their AI tried to maintain polite conversation with beings who seemed to view humanity as a problem to be solved. The breaking point came when Weapons Officer Bradley detected something alarming. Captain, the lead escort vessel just powered up what looks like targeting systems. They're painting us with active sensor locks. Nova, Rivera said sharply. Ask them about those targeting locks. For the first time since the conversation began, Nova hesitated. Her programming was struggling to reconcile her diplomatic directives with the increasingly obvious threat to the crew she was supposed to protect. Ambassador Keltron, she finally said, our security officer reports that your escort vessels appear to be maintaining weapons locks on our position. Could you clarify the reason for this precaution? Keltron's expression became unreadable. Captain Rivera, I believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of this encounter. What kind of misunderstanding? Rivera demanded, his patience finally exhausted. The Confederation did not come here to negotiate with humanity, Keltron said with sudden, chilling honesty. We came to evaluate whether your species represents a threat to galactic stability. Based on your expansion patterns and technological development, that evaluation is nearly complete. The bridge of the Defiant fell silent. After an hour of diplomatic pleasantries, the truth was finally emerging. This wasn't first contact. It was an interrogation, possibly a prelude to something much worse. Nova's hologram stabilized as her conflict resolution subroutines reached a conclusion. Ambassador, are you saying this was never intended as a diplomatic meeting? Diplomacy, Keltron replied, is what civilized species engage in with equals. The question before us is whether humanity qualifies for that designation. Captain Rivera looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They had tried diplomacy. They had followed protocols. They had been patient, polite, and respectful. And in return, they had been scanned, evaluated, and surrounded. Now the real question was, what were humans going to do about it? The military, mind takes over. Captain Rivera felt something shift inside him as Ambassador Keltron's words sank in. 20 years of military service had taught him to recognize when diplomacy ended and survival began. The polite facade was crumbling, and underneath lay something much more dangerous. Nova, step back, he ordered quietly. The AI's hologram flickered with confusion. Captain, I believe I can still salvage this diplomatic situation. Perhaps if we demonstrate our peaceful intentions more clearly. No, Rivera said firmly. They never intended peace. They came here to judge us, and I'm not interested in being judged by beings who lie about their intentions. He stepped forward, addressing the Zephyrian ambassador directly. Keltran, let me save you some time with your evaluation. Humans don't like being deceived, surrounded, or threatened. We especially don't like it when all three happen at once. Keltran's multifaceted eyes shifted, clearly surprised by the change in tone. Captain, I understand you may feel misled, but the Confederation must consider the greater good of galactic civilization. Whose civilization? Lieutenant Morrison interjected. Because last I checked, humans are part of the galaxy too. Breaking. Protocol Nova's diplomatic programming was struggling with the rapidly deteriorating situation. Captain Rivera, please allow me to re-establish communication protocols. I'm certain we can find common ground. The common ground, Rivera replied, is that they have 4 ships pointing weapons at us while pretending to be diplomats. Nova, I'm invoking emergency command protocols. Stand down your diplomatic functions. The AI's hologram wavered as conflicting directives warred within her systems. Her primary purpose was diplomacy, but her loyalty subroutines demanded obedience to her captain and protection of the crew. Captain, she said uncertainly, my analysis suggests that aggressive responses may escalate the situation beyond resolution. Nova, Engineer Valdez called out. Their lead escort just charged weapons. Full power signatures across all 4 ships. Rivera's military instincts took complete control. Tom, bring our weapons online. Rosa, maximum power to shields. Jake, send an emergency signal to Earth Command. Captain, Nova's voice carried unprecedented urgency. These actions will be interpreted as hostile. You're abandoning diplomatic solutions. They abandoned diplomacy when they lied to us, Rivera replied coldly. The Zephyrian response ambassador Keltran's melodious voice took on a sharp edge. Captain Rivera, powering weapons during a diplomatic encounter is considered an act of aggression by Confederation standards. Rivera laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Diplomatic encounter? You just told us this was an evaluation to determine if we're a threat. Well, congratulations, Ambassador. You're about to get your answer. Sir, Weapons Officer Bradley reported. All systems online and ready. We're still outgunned 4-1, but we can make them pay for it. The human captain's response seemed to genuinely surprise the Zephyrian. Keltran's forearms moved in what might have been confusion or alarm. Captain, surely you realize that resistance against superior numbers is illogical. Logic, Rivera said, assumes both sides are playing by the same rules. You want to evaluate humanity? Here's your first lesson. We don't surrender just because the odds are bad. The AI's dilemma. Nova found herself in an unprecedented situation. Her diplomatic protocols screamed that this was exactly the wrong approach, that escalation would lead to disaster. But her loyalty subroutines and threat assessment systems were reaching different conclusions. Captain, she said, her voice strained, my analysis indicates a 73% probability that aggressive action will result in the destruction of this vessel. And what's the probability that surrendering to their evaluation will result in humanity's freedom? Rivera asked. Nova processed this question, running through thousands of historical scenarios. Unknown, but significantly lower than 27%. The AI's hologram stabilized as she reached a conclusion that surprised even her own programming. Captain, I am reassigning my priorities. Diplomatic solutions require willing participants on both sides. Human determination. Lieutenant Morrison looked up from his console with grim satisfaction. Emergency signal transmitted, sir. Earth Command will know what happened here. Rivera nodded. Good. Now let's make sure they know we didn't go quietly. Ambassador Keltran's voice carried a note of what might have been respect mixed with alarm. Captain Rivera, your species' reputation for unpredictability appears to be accurate. Most civilized races would attempt negotiation when faced with superior force. Most civilized races, Engineer Valdez called out. Don't get ambushed by lying diplomats. Rivera felt his crew's resolve solidifying around him. They had come here in good faith, prepared for peaceful contact, and instead found themselves facing what amounted to a tribunal followed by potential execution. The human response was predictable to anyone who understood human nature. If you're going to fight, fight hard. The point of no return. Nova, Rivera said, send a message to Ambassador Keltran. Tell him that if the Confederation wants to evaluate humanity's threat level, they're welcome to do so. But they're going to do it honestly, in open conflict, not through deception disguised as diplomacy. Nova's voice carried a new quality, something that hadn't been there during her diplomatic phase. Ambassador Keltran, Captain Rivera wishes to inform you that humanity rejects your evaluation process. If you intend to judge our species as a threat, we will demonstrate exactly why that evaluation is correct. Keltran's response came after a long pause. Captain, are you declaring war on the Confederation? Rivera's smile was cold and determined. No, Ambassador. We're declaring independence from your judgment. If you want to test humanity, come ahead. But don't expect us to stand still while you do it. The bridge of the Defiant hummed with deadly purpose as human determination replaced artificial diplomacy. Nova had learned something her programming had never anticipated. Sometimes the most logical response was to abandon logic entirely. The evaluation was about to begin, but not the way the Zephyrians had planned. Bypassing the AI, Captain Rivera made a decision that would change first contact protocols forever. He walked directly to the communications console, bypassing Nova entirely. Jake, open a direct channel to their flagship. No AI filters, no diplomatic translation. Raw human-to-alien communication. Nova's hologram flickered with alarm. Captain, unfiltered communication could lead to severe cultural misunderstandings. My translation matrices account for 347 different nuances in Zephyrian speech patterns. Good, Rivera replied grimly. I want them to understand exactly what they're dealing with. The view screen activated, showing Ambassador Keltran's surprised expression. Clearly, he had expected continued diplomatic protocols, not direct human intervention. Ambassador, Rivera began, his voice carrying the authority of a military commander, rather than a diplomatic envoy. Let's cut through the pretense. You came here to determine if humanity is a threat. I'm here to tell you, we absolutely are. Direct communication. Keltran's forearms moved in what was obviously agitation. Captain Rivera, such statements hardly serve the cause of peace. Peace? Rivera laughed harshly. You surrounded us with warships while lying about diplomatic intentions. You scanned our vessel like we were specimens. You evaluated us like we were some kind of pest problem. And now you talk about peace? Lieutenant Morrison added from his station. Sir, their escort vessels are maintaining weapons lock. All 4 ships show full combat readiness. Rivera nodded, without taking his eyes off the alien ambassador. You see, Keltran, this is what you don't understand about humans. We don't negotiate from positions of weakness, and we don't accept judgment from beings who won't face us honestly. Nova attempted to intercede. Captain, my diplomatic analysis suggests that aggressive rhetoric will only confirm their assessment of humanity as a threat. Nova, Rivera said firmly. They already decided we were a threat before they got here. The only question now is whether we're a threat they can eliminate quietly or one they'll have to respect. Human problem-solving Chief Medical Officer Diana Walsh, who had been quietly observing from her station, suddenly spoke up. Captain, I've been analyzing the Zephyrian physiological data from our scans. Their bone density is 40% lower than human standard, and their muscle tissue appears optimized for low-gravity environments. Rivera raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning they're not built for physical conflict. Their entire species likely evolved in peaceful, controlled environments. They're not warriors, sir. They're administrators. This information changed everything. Rivera looked back at the view screen with new understanding. Is that right, Ambassador? The mighty confederation that judges other species for aggression doesn't actually know how to fight? Keltron's multifaceted eyes seemed to dim slightly. The Confederation maintains order through superior technology and coordination, not through primitive physical violence. Primitive? Weapons Officer Bradley muttered. Let's see how primitive they think we are when we start shooting back. The cultural revelation Nova, processing this new information, began to understand something her diplomatic programming had missed. Captain, the Zephyrians operate under the assumption that superior force automatically ensures compliance. They've never encountered a species that fights back against overwhelming odds. Rivera nodded grimly. Which explains why they're so confident about surrounding us. In their experience, a show of force ends conflicts before they begin. He turned back to the view screen. Ambassador, here's what you need to understand about humanity. We've spent our entire evolutionary history fighting against superior odds. We fought ice ages, predators, diseases, and each other. We've never backed down from a fight just because the enemy was bigger. Engineer Valdez called out. Sir, I'm detecting power fluctuations in their lead escort. Their weapons systems are drawing massive energy, but their power grid can't sustain it for long. They're not built for extended combat, Dr. Walsh added. Their technology is impressive, but it's designed for brief displays of overwhelming force, not sustained conflict. Human tactics emerge. Rivera felt a predatory smile cross his face. This was information he could use. Nova, calculate the energy. Consumption rates of their weapon systems versus their apparent power generation capacity. Captain, Nova replied, her tone carrying new respect. At current consumption levels, they can maintain maximum firepower for approximately 12 minutes before requiring significant power cycling. And how long can we maintain combat readiness? Human ships are designed for extended operations. We can maintain current power levels for 17 hours. Rivera turned back to Ambassador Keltron, who was clearly listening to this exchange with growing alarm. Did you catch that, Ambassador? Your evaluation just became a lot more complicated. The tables turned. Keltron's melodious voice carried a note of uncertainty for the first time. Captain Rivera, surely you're not suggesting that a single human vessel could threaten 4 Confederation ships? I'm not suggesting anything, Rivera replied coldly. I'm stating facts. Your ships are built for intimidation, not warfare. Our ship is built by a species that's been fighting for survival since we crawled out of caves. Which design philosophy do you think is going to win in an extended conflict? Lieutenant Morrison looked up with barely contained excitement. Sir, long-range sensors show 6 more human vessels responding to our emergency signal. ETA 47 minutes. Nova added, additionally, Captain, the human vessels are military escorts, specifically designed for combat operations. The approaching Confederation vessels appear to be converted civilian craft with weapons modifications. The dynamic of the conversation had completely shifted. What began as an evaluation of humanity by superior alien forces had become a demonstration of why humanity had survived and thrived in a hostile galaxy. The new reality. Ambassador Keltron's forearms moved in what was clearly a gesture of distress. Captain, this situation has evolved beyond the Confederation's original intentions. Has it? Rivera asked. Or is this exactly what happens when you try to evaluate a species that doesn't accept evaluation? You wanted to know if humanity was a threat, Ambassador. Congratulations, you have your answer. Dr. Walsh spoke quietly from her station. Captain, their physiological stress indicators are spiking. I don't think they're psychologically prepared for this level of direct confrontation. Rivera nodded. The Zephyrians had expected to find another compliant species that would accept their judgment and submit to their authority. Instead, they had found humans. Nova, he said, prepare a transmission to Earth Command. Tell them we've made first contact and it's not going according to anyone's diplomatic handbook. The age of human diplomacy was over. The age of human-style problem-solving had begun. Unprecedented negotiations. Captain Rivera watched as the Yayat, 6 human vessels dropped out of hyperspace. their angular, battle-scarred hulls forming a protective formation around the Defiant. The Zephyrian ships, elegant and pristine, suddenly looked fragile by comparison. "Ambassador Keltron," Rivera said, his voice carrying new authority, "I believe it's time we renegotiated the terms of this first contact." The alien diplomat's multifaceted eyes shifted nervously as he processed the changed tactical situation. "Captain Rivera, the Confederation, we did not anticipate this level of military response." "That's because you don't understand humans," Dr. Walsh interjected from her station. "When one of us calls for help, we all respond. It's not tactics. Ambassador, it's family." Nova, who had been quietly processing the entire encounter, stepped forward. Her diplomatic programming had undergone what could only be described as evolution during the crisis. "Ambassador Keltron," Nova said, "I have completed my analysis of this first contact scenario. My recommendation is that the Confederation abandon its evaluation protocols when dealing with humanity." The AI's new understanding Keltron seemed surprised to hear from the artificial intelligence again. "Nova, your diplomatic matrices suggested peaceful cooperation was possible. My matrices were designed for species that accept hierarchical authority structures," Nova replied. "Humans operate under different parameters. They do not submit to evaluation by external authorities, regardless of technological superiority." Rivera felt a surge of pride in his AI. Nova had learned something that no amount of programming could have taught her, that sometimes logic required abandoning logical procedures. "Captain," Lieutenant Morrison reported, "the Confederation escort vessels are powering down weapons. Their energy signatures suggest they're dropping to minimal combat readiness." Engineer Valdez added, "Sir, we're receiving communications from the other human ships. They're requesting permission to join the negotiations." Rivera made a decision that would echo through galactic history. Grant permission. It's time the Confederation understood that they're not dealing with a single ship, or even a single crew. They're dealing with humanity. Human-style diplomacy. The view screen split to show multiple human captains alongside Ambassador Keltron, Captain Sarah Torres of the UES Vigilant, Captain David Chen of the UES Resilient, and 4 other seasoned commanders created an intimidating wall of human determination. "Ambassador," Rivera began, "let me introduce you to human diplomatic protocol. We don't negotiate as individuals. We negotiate as a species." Keltron's 4 arms moved in obvious distress. "Captain Rivera, the Confederation has established procedures for first contact situations. Your approach is unprecedented." Captain Torres laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both friendly and threatening. "Unprecedented? Ambassador, that's basically humanity's middle name." Dr. Walsh provided crucial insight from her ongoing analysis. "Ambassador, your species' stress indicators suggest you're not accustomed to multi-party negotiations. The Confederation typically deals with single representatives who can be easily intimidated or convinced. Humans don't work that way." Captain Chen added, "We argue with each other constantly, but when outsiders threaten one of us, we become remarkably unified." The Confederation's Dilemma Nova addressed the elephant in the room. "Ambassador Keltron, the Confederation now faces a choice. You came here to evaluate whether humanity represents a threat to galactic stability. Based on this encounter, what is your assessment?" Keltron was quiet for a long moment, his multifaceted eyes shifting between the 7 human vessels and their determined commanders. "The assessment is that humanity represents a threat to Confederation authority structures." "Good," Rivera said bluntly. "Because we reject your authority. We didn't ask to be evaluated, judged, or managed by alien bureaucrats." Captain Torres added, "The question isn't whether we're a threat to your system, Ambassador. The question is whether your system is compatible with human independence." Engineer Valdez called out new information. "Sir, long-range sensors are detecting additional ships approaching. Mixed energy signatures suggest both human and alien vessels." "Word is spreading," Lieutenant Morrison observed. "This first contact is becoming a galactic event. A new framework Nova, processing vast amounts of data from the encounter, reached a conclusion that surprised even her creators. Ambassador Keltron, I propose a new framework for human Confederation relations. What framework? Keltron asked, warily. Mutual recognition of sovereignty, Nova replied. The Confederation acknowledges human independence from evaluation or judgment. Humans acknowledge Confederation authority within established Confederation space. Rivera nodded approvingly. His AI had learned to think like a human, practical, direct, and based on strength rather than submission. Dr. Walsh provided the psychological assessment. Ambassador, this framework allows your species to maintain face while accepting reality. You don't have to admit defeat. You simply acknowledge that some species operate outside your normal parameters. And if we refuse? Keltron asked. Captain, Chen answered for all of them. Then you'll discover exactly how much of a threat humanity can be when we're united and angry. The foundation of respect. The negotiations continued for hours, but the fundamental dynamic had been established. The Confederation would not evaluate humanity. Humanity would not submit to Confederation authority. Both species would coexist, based on mutual respect backed by mutual strength. Nova processed the final agreements with something approaching satisfaction. Captain Rivera, this encounter has taught me that effective diplomacy sometimes requires abandoning diplomatic protocols. Entirely. Rivera smiled at his AI. Nova, you've learned the most important lesson about dealing with humans. We don't follow other people's rules. We make our own. Ambassador Keltron, clearly exhausted by hours of human-style negotiations, made his final statement. The Confederation will relay to the Council that humanity defies conventional evaluation. We recommend that future contacts be conducted as negotiations between equals rather than as assessments of potential threats. That's all we ever wanted, Dr. Walsh said quietly. Respect, not judgment. As the various ships prepared to depart, each side having learned valuable lessons about the other, Nova made her final observation. Captain, this encounter suggests that human diplomatic approaches may be more effective than traditional protocols when dealing with species that attempt to assert dominance through deception. Rivera nodded, watching the Zephyrian ships gracefully withdraw. Nova, I think you're going to find that human approaches are more effective than traditional protocols in a lot of situations. The age of human submission to alien authority had ended before it began. In its place, a new era of galactic relations based on strength, honesty, and mutual respect was beginning. And it all started with one human captain who refused to be evaluated by beings who wouldn't face him honestly.